In this tutorial, we're going to make the hooded coat called Darkness by Kim Hargreaves. The pattern is in her book called Still, and I've put a link below in the description notes as to where you can buy this book. Kim Hargreaves has been one of my favourite designers for years, and this book Still has got some really lovely patterns in it. I would describe her designs as being feminine and pretty, but still very elegant and simple styling. And she pays a lot of attention to how the garment fits on the body. What's really exciting is that most of her patterns are suitable for the inexperienced knitter. If you're confident with both the knit and purl stitch and casting on, and this hooded coat inspires you, then I really want to encourage you to have the confidence to follow along and knit this project. This video will take you step by step through the construction of the garment, including showing you in detail all of the techniques you'll need to make it. You will of course first need to buy the pattern so that you have all the details for your correct size and measurements. The book has many other lovely patterns in it, so I will do some tutorials on a couple more patterns in the book. The recommended yarn for this coat is the Rowan Brushed Fleece, and it's a single ply, extremely soft baby alpaca and wool blend, and it has zero scratch to it. It's beautiful. And unlike many other chunky yarns, this knits up to be a really lightweight fabric, and that's a fantastic quality for a coat because although it's going to be really beautiful and warm, it's not going to feel heavy on you. And because the fabric has no weight to it, it also won't sag, which often happens with chunky cardigans, chunky heavy wool cardigans. So there's 14 colours in this, and I've used Nook, which is number 260. This is my daughter Madeline, and I'm going to quickly run through the construction of the coat. So we'll start with the back piece, and you'll be knitting it from the bottom up, and there's decreases on both sides, so slight shaping up to the waist. Then we continue to knit straight to the armhole, and we have shaping underneath the armhole here, and then casting off for the shoulders and for the back neck. And then the next section we start with is the side sections, and they mirror the back shaping. So a few decreases along up to the waist, then straight up, and we've got the underarm shaping here, and then casting off for our shoulders. And this front panel just continues straight up to become part of the hood. And while we've cast off some stitches here for the shoulders, we also cast on more stitches, and that continues on for the back of the hood, and this section is knitted up to the top, and both sides of the front you can see are knitted right up and then grafted together up the top here. The sleeves are then knitted separately and then seamed up, and everything's seamed together. So grab your wool and your pattern and your needles, and I'll see you in the next section, and we'll start a gauge and cast on. And if at any time in the future that you want to jump to different parts of this tutorial, you can do so by clicking in the different links in the descriptions below. I really want to encourage you to do a gauge swatch. I usually have a knitting tension that matches the recommended pattern swatch tension, but in this case I had to go from the recommended 6mm needles down to a 5mm needle. So if you know that you are a loose knitter, start your gauge with a smaller needle size and keep going down until you get the required 14 stitches per 10 centimetres. The row count is not as important because the pattern's always going to tell you to keep knitting to the desired length, and they'll give a centimetre for that. So it's really important that your fabric that you're knitting is going to have the same tension that the designer wanted. So this cozy hooded coat is already like a big blanket, and so it's a loose fit. And if you knit a loose fabric as well, the coat is going to have even less structure and look very sloppy. So you want to have a nice firm, this is quite firm here, blanket kind of feel, and it'll still have a lovely drape to it. Okay, so what I'm showing you here is much bigger than what you would knit. It's actually the front piece, one of the front pieces. But I've put my first needle here, my first pin, to show you. And we look when we're counting stitches across, we look for the V's, shaped like that. Then I put my tape measure down and I'm going to count the rows of columns of V's. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So I've got the correct gauge. So once you've completed your gauge and chosen what size needles you're going to use, it's time to start. And we're going to start with the back section of the coat. So the first thing you need to do is cast on your stitches, and you'll cast on the given amount of stitches for your size. And we're going to use the long tail cast on method. So if you need to see a slower instructional video on how to do the long tail cast on, I've included a link below. But I've, as you can see, casted on most of my stitches, and I've got a few more to go, and I'll show you slowly how to do that. So we have our working yarn in our right hand, and that's attached to our ball of wool. And in our left hand is the tail. So we start like this and hold the tail end in our left hand. We're going to put the thumb over the top of the yarn and around like this. I'll show you that one more time. Over the top and around. And then we put the needle up and we can pinch it with our left hand just to hold it in place. And we're going to knit it like a knit stitch so that the working yarn is going anti-clockwise underneath the needle. And then we've got this loop and our thumb goes over the top of the needle and we pull with our left hand. So we're going to pull with the yarn end. We never pull with this. If we pull with the working yarn, then the stitches are going to be too tight on the needle and we don't want that. So I'll show you again. We've got our thumb and we put the thumb over the top and around like that. The needle goes up and we pinch it, and then the working yarn goes anti-clockwise underneath the needle and we put the loop over the top and pull it. So once you've got on your correct amount of stitches, we're going to be working the fabric of the garment, and that's going to be in stocking stitch. So that means we're going to knit on the right side and purl on the wrong side. And you have to do this for a given amount of rows before you start decreasing. So I'm going to just start knitting now. So again, if you want to revise your knit stitch, I'll have a link, a slow instructional video of that below, and you can have a look. And the first row can be just a little tight, then it'll loosen up. So I'm just going to knit through this row reasonably quickly because I want to show you what I do on the purl side. I've just finished my first knit row and now I'm going to do the first purl row. So I turn it around, and what I want to show you is we want to keep the edges very firm and even and not loose. So some people just simply slip the first stitch on a purl row. I knit it. So regardless of what the pattern says, I always knit the first stitch on a purl row. So I'm knitting it now. And now I'm ready to purl. So make sure that you're going to bring the yarn, the working yarn, back underneath the needle and purl. So now I will continue to purl all the way to the end of the row until I get to the last stitch. And the very last stitch I'm going to knit it. I'm up to the last two stitches. So I'm going to purl one. And now I'm going to put the yarn underneath the needle and I'm going to knit the last one. And I'm going to do that always, knitting the first and the last stitch on all of the purl rows. Okay, so you need to continue in stocking stitch for as many rows as the pattern says to, and then we're going to do the decrease row. So I'll show you how to do that now. you're ready now for the decrease, for the first decrease row. And all the decreases are going to be on the right side of the fabric. So that's on the knit side. So that's why they will always tell you ending with a wrong side row. That means the last row you've knitted is a purl side. And then you're ready to do the decreases on the right side, on the knit side. So here we go. They tell you first of all to knit 2 and then knit 2 together. So the first decrease is going to be slightly in from the edge, and that keeps the edge nice and even. So knit 2 together, we're putting our needle behind 2 stitches and just going to knit them the same as if we were knitting 1. So if we were to knit 1, it would look like this. We simply put the needle behind the second stitch and up through the inside loop and knit both of them together like this. And there we go, and we've got a right slanting decrease. So then we're required to knit to the end of the row, and then we do another knit 2, but we do it through the back loop. So I'll show you how to do that. And you'll have 4 decrease rows altogether with a set amount of stocking stitch rows in between, and all of that information's in your pattern. And then when you've done that, you'll have to keep knitting in stocking stitch until the required length, and then we'll be ready for the shaping of the armholes. Okay, so now we have 4 stitches left, and we're going to decrease these 2 stitches here by knitting them together through the back loop. So at the beginning of the row we knitted them together through the front loop, and the front loop is this part of the stitch on the needle, and the back loop is here, this side. Okay, so before we knitted through the front loop, that meant we put the right hand needle up and through on this side and knitted. Now this time it says knit 2 together, TBL, through back loop, and that means we put the right hand needle under at the back, so straight through on the back side of the loop, and then we knit together like that and off, and that creates a decrease that leans to the left. So that's as simple as it is. That's a decrease row, and you have 4 of those, and then continue knitting in stocking stitch until you've got the required length, and I'll show you how to do the shaping of the armhole. You've done your 4 decrease rows, and you've stocking stitched all the way up to the size that you need to shape your armholes, and now we're ready. So at the beginning of the next 2 rows, so that means at the beginning of, and you should have just finished doing a purl row. So your last row was a purl row, and now you're ready to do a knit row. So at the beginning of this row and the next one, you're going to cast off stitches, and again your size will tell you how many you cast off, but I'll show you how to do that. So we're on a knit row, on a knit side, so we're going to knit, and I'm going to cast off 3 stitches. So I knit the first one, and because we're casting off, we don't want it to have it all tight and bunched up. We want it to be just as elastic as the fabric underneath. But I'm going to keep these stitches a little looser than when I would normally knit them. So I'm going to knit the first 2, and I just sort of pinch to make sure, yeah, it's pretty loose. And then with my left hand needle, I'm going to take the first stitch, give it a bit of a tug to make sure it really is loose, and lift it up and over the second stitch. Okay, so it's worth working this slowly because you don't want to have to undo it because you know that you've done it too tight. So that's 1 stitch cast off, and then I knit again, keeping always these stitches on the right hand needle loose. That's 2 stitches. You see how I've got about this much loose here. So it's normally if I would knit I would have it that tight, but I've just got it it's almost like I'm casting off with a needle that's twice as big. So that's 1, 2, now my third stitch, and I lift the back stitch up over the last stitch I've done. There's 3, 1, and you can see it here. There's a little V like that. 1, 2, 3. So you just want to double check that. You can also count your rows here. 1, 2, 3 of those knit columns have been cast off. So now I need to knit to the end of the row. That's my first cast off. So I knit right to the end of the row, and then I'll be casting off 3 stitches on the purl side. Okay, I'm doing 3 stitches, but you will have a different amount of stitches depending on the size that you're knitting. Okay, so I've finished that. Now I turn it around, and I have the left side facing the wrong side, and this is the purl side, and I have to cast off again. So as you've been doing, and as I've told you to start off with, it's a purl side row, so we start the first and last stitches we're always going to knit. So I knit this stitch, I make sure it's nice and looser than what I would normally knit it, and then I put my working yarn round to the front and I purl the next stitch. So whenever you cast off either knit or purl in pattern. Okay, so I'm not going to knit 2 and then cast off. I'm going to knit 1, purl 1. Okay, so now I'm ready. I've done the purl, and I take the back stitch, give it a bit of a tug so I know it's loose, and put it up over the second stitch. And then I can just check, yeah, that's a good loose stitch. So that's 1 stitch cast off. I knit another one, and then over I go, 2. So I'm still purling all of these stitches. My working yarn's on at the front of the fabric, and see how much I'm making these stitches looser. And 3, and I can just take my needle out and see, yes, that's not bunched up. We don't want it bunched up. We want it to have the same width as the fabric beneath. Okay, so then I've cast off at the beginning of those 2 rows. So cast off at the beginning of a knit row and of a purl row. So I'm going to purl to the end, and of course at the end I'm going to knit the very last stitch, and then the pattern tells me to decrease 1 stitch on either end for the next I think it says the next 3 rows, and then on following rows, and that's written in your pattern. So make sure that you read that to get it correct for your size. But I'll just show you what I do then. So then when I'm knitting, when I'm decreasing on both sides, I'm going to go back to doing knit 2 together. Okay, so I turn it around again, and the pattern says decrease on either end of the next row, and I'll simply do that decrease by knitting 2 together. So it's my first, my second, I knit 2 together like this. Okay, I'll just show you that again one more time. Whoops, I have dropped a stitch. There we go. Just make sure I'm not splitting the wool. So I'll show you that again a little slower. So I just put my needle up through the 2 front loops, knit them together, and I'm going to knit to the last 2 stitches. Okay, so I'm going to knit to the end. Now I've got the last 2 stitches together, and I'm going to decrease. So I knit 2 together, and that gets rid of 1. So there I've decreased on that side and on that side. And that's what it says. The pattern says, I'm going to read it again, decrease 1 stitch at each end of the the following rows. So I've done it on the knit side. Now I have to do it again on the purl side. So as you know, I knit the first stitch, but this time I have to decrease at either end. So I'm going to knit both stitches together, and that'll be my decrease. So I'll still do a knit two together, and then I'll purl, which I've just done. Then I'll purl to the end of the row, purl to the last two stitches, and I'll knit those two together. So I'm purling to the last two stitches. Okay, so I'm at the last two stitches. There's my cast off edge there, and now I'm going to decrease here at this side, and that means knit two together. So I'll put the yarn around to the back of the fabric and knit two together. Okay, so you can start to see the shape of the armhole, and that's going to continue up like this. So I've decreased there by knitting two together, and at the beginning of the purl row, there's the other side, I knitted two together. I think you have to do that a few more times, but you read your pattern to make sure that you're doing it the right amount for your sizes. Each size is slightly different. Okay, so I'm just decreasing the final stitch, the stitches, by knitting them together. When you've done the correct amount, you'll continue to knit up to the required length, and then we'll be ready to shape the shoulders and the back neck. So that's exciting. Keep going. We've knit the back section now to the required length, and we're ready to shape the shoulders and the back neck. So make sure that your last row was a purl row on the wrong side of the fabric, and that you now have the right side of the fabric facing you to cast off for the shoulders. So we're going to work the right shoulder first, and we'll leave the remaining stitches on a stitch holder, and this is a typical stitch holder. If you don't have this, you can also use another set of needles, preferably a smaller size, because it's easier to thread them on and off the stitches. So we'll work the shaping for the right shoulder first, and then we'll rejoin the yarn and cast off the middle stitches for the back neck, and then work the left shoulder exactly the same as the right shoulder, but in reverse shaping. Good. So have a look at check your pattern, and for exactly how many stitches you have to cast off. I'm going to cast off 5. So like we did for the armhole shaping here, we start off knitting 2 stitches very loosely. Okay, so making sure that you could actually fit in two needles, as if you were knitting or casting off on a size that's double size as what you have. And then I take the back stitch, give it a tug, and put it over the front stitch. It's 1. Knit the next one, make sure they're loose. 2. 3. 4. All the time just checking that the cast off edge is as elastic as the fabric underneath. Like that. Mine was a little tight then, so I'll loosen them up. Okay, so once you've cast off the amount for your size, and every size is different, keep knitting until you have the required amount of stitches that it says in the pattern for your size on your right hand needle. Okay, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So Now I have to thread all of these remaining stitches onto my stitch holder. So I prefer to just work with another set of circular needles of a much smaller needle size, and I simply thread them over. Now when you're threading them over, thread them over purlwise, not knitwise. So just putting the needle in from right to left, just slipping each stitch off one at a time. And then when you go to thread them back onto a needle, all the stitches will be the right way and be ready to knit or purl. So the needle straight in, right to left. So I've put my remaining stitches on my spare needle or your stitch holder, and I'm now going to continue to work the shaping on the right shoulder. So I have to turn my work around so that the purl side, the wrong side of the fabric, is facing me, and I'm going to cast off 4 stitches, and this will be on the neck, the back neck edge. That's the shoulder edge, and this is the back neck edge. So I will cast off 4 stitches and then continue to purl on the wrong side of the row to the end of the row. Now, as always, on a purl side row, I will always knit the first and the last stitches, so even when casting off. So I will knit this stitch, put my yarn to the front of the work and purl. So I have 2 stitches on my right hand needle, and I'm going to take the first one and pass it over the second. Now, if I'm just doing purl, I can also put my yarn back on this side, and it's easier for me to pass the stitch over. That's 2. 3. 4. Now you'll need to check your pattern to see how many stitches you need to cast off for your size. So I've done that, and now I'm going to purl to the end. Or purl to my last stitch, then I put my wool to the back of the work and knit it. Okay, so now I turn my work back again. We're just leaving these stitches and just working this, and I have my remaining stitches I have to cast off. So always making sure that the cast off edge is the same elasticity as the fabric underneath. Okay, so I've cast off here. I've got this loop, so I can put my wool. I can either just cut it. You can leave quite a long tail because you'll be sewing. You need to sew this up with the front side. So if you leave quite a long tail, you've got enough to sew up. Now I'm just going to pull mine because my scissors aren't handy. And then I put my tail through the loop like this, pull it tight, and I've finished the right shoulder. We're ready now to join our yarn from our ball of wool back onto the remaining stitches that have been on our stitch holder or your other pair of needles. If you've used a smaller pair of needles like me, you don't have to slip these stitches back onto your correct needle size first, just knit them on. So here's the end of our ball of wool, and just leave about that much, and we can hold it tight on the back side here. I've just woven it in between my fingers a little bit and then pinched it tight, and I'm going to immediately start knitting and casting off. So I knit 2 stitches loosely, and then take the first one, put it over the second one. Now this tail end here, you'll later on just darn or weave into the seam. So just hold it still or tight for the first few stitches until it's nice and secure, then you can let it go. So still remember to keep these stitches loose, not too loose because we don't want the neck to be sloppy, but just the same or a fraction tighter than the stretch fabric underneath. So stop every now and again and check. Otherwise you'll have to back pick too much if you go to the end and then check. So it's always better to take a little bit slower, a little bit more time, and double checking all the time. It's less undoing. Okay, so just before I knit on, I check. Yep, that's good. So it's not too loose, but it certainly is going to stretch with this. Okay, so they're the back neck stitches which have been cast off, and the shoulder, you can see the shoulder edge is just slightly higher. We have a little dip in here. Don't worry about that. That is going to be sewn together when we've got the hood. Okay, so now I need to continue to knit to the end of this row. And I'm ready to do the same shaping that I did on the right side, but in reverse. So in the right side, I cast off the first amount of stitches on the right side of the row on a knit row. So now I'm going to be casting those stitches off on a purl. So as usual on a purl side, I start with a knit stitch. So I knit one, put the yarn forward underneath the needle, purl one, and then start casting off. So here I'm just putting my working yarn to the back because it's easy for me when how I'm holding my needle. Okay. Now before I knit on, I just check, is that good? Yep. And now I'm going to purl to the end of the row, or purl to the last stitch. Put my yarn to the back, knit the last stitch, and I'm going to turn it around again. Okay, so now I need to cast off 4 stitches, and when we did that on the right side we were casting off on the purl side. Now we're going to be casting off the 4 stitches on the knit side. So, and when I say 4 stitches, it's not necessarily 4 stitches for you, so always check that pattern. Okay, I've done that, and now I knit to the end. And I turn my work around again, and I cast off the remaining stitches on the purl side, whereas on the right side of the right shoulder I cast off my remaining stitches on the knit side. And that's what it means by do the same shaping but in reverse. So you'll do that also with the right front. You'll start off knitting the left front, and it'll tell you in detail how to cast off and what the shaping is. And then when you're ready to do the right front, it'll say work the same as the left front but in reverse. And so now you know what it means by the reverse shaping. Okay, so nearly finished. Now I'm on the purl side, and I've got one last stitch, and so that's going to be a knit stitch. I knit it, and there we are. And again, I've got a tail, and I can leave it quite long so that I've got enough to sew up with. Break it, put it through the loop. Okay, so we'll turn the work around and see what we've got. So you've got a few ends to weave in, but that's okay. So we've got the armhole shaping coming up. You can see that the neck, the back neck here, is a little lower than the shoulders, and that's right. So it's just curved in like this. It's a little bit steppy, but that's when you sew these seams together, which I'll show you in detail how to do, you'll lose that. Okay, so well done. You've just completed your back section. You've learnt all the skills that you need to learn to knit the left front and the right front right up until the shoulders, where we'll be increasing on some more stitches and then shaping the hood. So well done. So next up is the left front. You've completed the back, and now you're going to start working on the left front. And after completing the back section, you have practiced all the skills that you'll need to work the left front. So that means that by yourself, you'll be able to go right up through the shaping of the armholes and the shoulders until we're ready to shape the hood. So we'll have to cast on some stitches for that and shape the hood. But you can follow the pattern up until that section. The only difference here, of course, is on the back section, you were decreasing on both sides of the fabric. And on the fronts, you'll only decrease on one side, and the other side has a garter stitch decorative edging. And this is an example here. So you can see how, and I lay it flat, we've got the stocking stitch and the last two stitches. I'm showing you the right front. So on the right front, the last two stitches are in garter stitch, which means that the purl row, the last two stitches are knitted. And you have this decorative edging, which will go all along the edge and right up and over the hood. So cast on the correct amount of stitches for your size on the left front, and I'll show you, I'll just knit through with you that decorative edge. So we're going to start with the knit side of the fabric, and so we're going to knit through this row. And by now you should feel quite comfortable with stocking stitch and feel like you're getting faster and faster. You'll be an expert at stocking stitch by the time you finish the garment. Okay, so I've finished my first row of stocking stitch. Now I'm going to turn over on the purl side, and the first two stitches I'm going to knit, and that's going to create this decorative edge. So knit one, knit two, and I put the yarn, remember always to put the yarn back to the front of the work, and we purl. Okay, so Continue now working, do your matching decreases that will match the back side, the back that you've already completed. Go right through the shaping of the armhole and the shaping of the shoulder. That should all be clear for you. And then I'll see you when we're ready to cast on some extra stitches and shape the hood. We have worked the left front now right up until the shaping of the hood. So you can see here, this is the armhole shaping, and then we've got the shoulder shaping, and we're ready for the shaping of the hood, and it says to cast on the set amount of stitches for your size at the beginning of the next row. So I'm going to show you how to do that, and then after you've done that, so you're going to be casting on the stitches here. And then you're going to work stocking stitch for the required amount of rows that the pattern tells you, and then at the back of the hood you'll start to decrease. So first of all, let's have a look at the casting on the stitches. So put your work so that the wrong side is facing you now, and your needle with the stitches on is on your right hand, and it's going to be very similar to a long tail cast on. So you've got the yarn in your left hand. Now I'm going to put my thumb over the top and around like this, and then I'm just going to put my right hand needle through here and slip it on. So this is a very basic cast on. It's not going to have a really strong edge, so that's why we don't use it when we're casting on a proper garment. But this edge is going to be sewn to the back neck of the back section, so this is fine. So I'll show you again. The thumb goes over the top and round, and then you put the right hand needle up and pull it on. So I'm just going to check I've got the right amount of stitches. Good. Okay, so cast on the required amount of stitches at the beginning of the next row. Okay, now what you need to do is actually knit that row. So you turn it around so the knit side of the fabric, the right side of the fabric, is facing you, and then you're going to go through and knit those stitches. So it can be a little sticky. I have to be careful that it doesn't fall off the end of the needle because they're not really sturdy stitches. So I'm sort of loosening them up from this side first and then taking my needle around behind and knitting it. Otherwise you can split the wool quite easily with this fluffy yarn. So it's a little slower going, but there's only a few stitches, so it doesn't take that long. There. Nearly there. One last stitch. Okay, so they're all my newly cast on stitches, and I continue to work to the end of that row, which means knit to it. Okay, so we've worked that first row. Now remember that we have this decorative garter stitch edging, okay, along the front. Now that's going to continue up right up around the hood. So don't forget to keep knitting the first 2 stitches on the purl row. So now you're required to knit, I think, around 21 rows of stocking stitch. And then your last row will be ending on a wrong side row, and you will be ready to do the decreases on the back of the hood on the edge. So I'll see you there. We've got the shoulder seam here, and this is the back of the hood, and you've worked the required number of rows ending with a purl row, and you now have the knit side facing you. And we're ready to start the decreases at the back of the hood. You're going to do this in the same way as the side seam decreases, and that is knit 2, and then knit 2 together. Okay, so knit 2 together, and then keep knitting to the edge of the hood, which goes around the face. So continue as the pattern says for your size, working the decreases until you're up to the section where the decreases will be on the edge stitches of the row, and I will show you how to do that. We're continuing on now with the shaping of the hood, and we're up to the back top part of the hood. So you've ended with a right side row, and the pattern now says that you have to decrease on the edge stitches of the rows, and you'll be decreasing on 5 consecutive rows. So that means we turn it around, and the first row will be a purl row. Because we're keeping the pattern going along the edge, we're going to knit the first 2 and then purl to the last 2 stitches, and we're just simply going to knit those 2 together. Okay, I've purled to the last 2 stitches. Now, because I always, on a purl row, knit my last stitch, I'm just going to knit these 2 together, and that's a decreased. So I've decreased 1 stitch. Okay, now we need to do this 5 times. So we turn it around, and we're ready on the right side of the fabric again, and we're going to start by knitting 2 together. And then knit to the end of the row. So this is what you have to do when the pattern says to decrease on the edge stitches of the rows. So we're not doing the decrease 2 stitches in, but on the very edge. Okay, so continue on, do your 5 rows with decreases on this edge, on the back edge, and you should see it just rounding off like that in a nice way. And then your last row will be a wrong side row, and then we're ready to cast off. We're starting to see now this nice rounded curve at the back of the hood, and now we're up to casting off groups of stitches at a time, and this will always be done on the right side of the fabric, so on a knit row and on alternative knit rows, and in between you'll have your purl row coming back. So to avoid this having steps like this, when we're casting off, always the first stitch, we're just going to slip and not knit it. So check your pattern to cast off the required number of stitches for your size, and I'll do it with you. So we just slip this stitch off the needle, not knitting it, and then we knit the second stitch, and we're going to pass the slipped stitch, which we didn't knit, over the top. So that's 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you do how many you need, and you can see how that is just a nice even graded line, and it's not going to get a step on it. So then we knit to the end of the row, purl back, and we do that again. So I'm ready now for my second lot of casting off. I slip the first stitch off, knit the second, pass the slip stitch over the top. So I didn't knit that first stitch. This is very important. Then cast off the required amount for my size, and you do the same for your size. Make sure that you're casting off loosely. We don't want it puckered at the top. So you can see how smooth that is around there, and it's not forming steps. This is what they want you to do with the slipping the first stitch off. So continue until you have the required 22 stitches at the end, and then you're going to leave that on a holder. And when you've done your right side, your right front side, we will be ready to graft the two lots along the top of the hood together. We've now completed the hood. You can see we've got the decorative edge up this side and this nice curve here for the hood. And we've got 22 stitches left on our needles with the right side facing for the next row. So that's great. Now you need to continue and knit up the right front, exactly the same but in reverse. And when you've done the same thing and you've got 22 stitches on your needle, we're not going to seam this, we're going to use a grafting stitch and knit them both together there. And I'll show you how to do that. Well done. We're working on the sleeves now, so you need to cast on the number of stitches for your size and work in stocking stitch for the given amount of rows, ending with a wrong side row. So all increases on the sleeve are worked on the right side of the fabric, so that means they're worked on the knit row. So just like for the back section and the side sections, the decreases were worked not on the very edge of the fabric, but 3 stitches in from the edge. So the increases are also worked 3 stitches in from the edge. And I'm going to show you now how to do that. And there's 2 different ways that you can, there's 2 different increase stitches that you can use. I'll show you both of them and you can decide which one you want. So the pattern says to knit 3 stitches and then make 1. So the first one I'm going to show you is perhaps an increased stitch that you'll want to use, particularly when the wool is very clear and the stitch definition on a garment is very easy to see, because it's the neatest, most professional looking increased stitch. On this fabric, because it's sort of fluffy, it really doesn't matter, but I'm going to show you how to do it. So you're going to take, we've knitted our 3 stitches, and you're going to take band of wool, or the bar of wool that goes from this. There's one column of knit stitches here, and the other column that goes up to the stitch on the needle. If you stretch that apart, you'll see you've got this band here, or bar. So you're going to lift that up, and you can lift it up with the right-hand needle, and you're going to put it or transfer it over the top of the left-hand needle like that. And then you're going to knit through the back loop. So this is the front loop here, and the back loop is there. So you're going to put your right-hand needle behind and through like that. And you're going to knit it. And what that's going to do is give it a twist. And then in between this column of stitches and this column of stitches, we're going to start a new column of stitches. Okay, and that'll be your increase stitch. I'm going to show you that one more time. So, let that go. You've knitted 3 stitches, and then you find the bar of wool that goes between this stitch and this stitch. You lift it up with the right-hand needle, and you transfer it across onto the left-hand needle, and then you're going to knit into the back loop like that. And that's your increase stitch. Now that'll give you the neatest increase stitch. So that's option 1. The next option you can do, I'm going to unpick it now, is you knit 3 stitches. Well, I'm going to knit 2, and then on my 3rd stitch I'm going to increase, and I'm going to knit through the front loop and then knit through the back loop of the same stitch before pulling off that stitch off the left-hand needle, and that'll give me an increase. So that's going to look like this. I knit in and pull it through. Now I don't pull it off. Normally I would do that, but I'm not going to. I'm going to leave this stitch still on the left-hand needle. I'm going to put my right-hand needle back and through and knit through the back of the loop. And then I'm going to pull it off. And here you can see we have our normal stitch and the increase stitch. And the increase stitch has got a band from right to left, horizontal, like a purl stitch. So that's why that one doesn't look so neat. But because this is a fluffy fabric, you really are not going to see this. So you could use this one very easily. So I'm going to show you how to do it again. The choice is really whatever you'd like. So I come to my 3rd stitch, I knit it through the front loop. Don't take it off the left needle. I put my tip of my needle, right-hand needle, through the back loop and knit it. And then I pull it off. And there's my stitch. Okay, then you're told to knit to the last 3 stitches. So we're going to do this. And this is the increase row that you'll be doing. You've got a set amount of increase rows, and in between a set amount of stocking stitch rows, and the pattern will tell you exactly how many for your size. So I've knitted to the end of the row, bar 3 stitches, 1, 2, 3. The first method, which is commonly just called make one, you take the bar of wool that is going from this stitch and this stitch, in between, runs horizontal. You put your tip of the right hand needle underneath, and then you use that to transfer it over onto the left hand needle. And now we're going to knit through the back loop. So the front loop is what we see in front of the needle, and the back loop is this one. So we're going to put the right hand tip of the needle through the back of the loop and then knit it. And then it's a twisted stitch. You can see it there. This wool is fuzzy, so you can't see it so clearly. And you've got a column of knit stitches. And remember, a column of knit stitches looks like a series of V's. Okay, like that. V's. And so you know that all of those leading up to that stitch, that's one column. And all of these leading up to that stitch is the next column. And we're going to start in between here a new column, and that's a make one. Okay, so that's that way. And if you're going to just do it by knitting through the front and back loop of a stitch, you would do that like this. So because I want, if I go back here, I've knitted 3 and then there's my knit through the back loop increase and it's got a horizontal bar and I'm wanting that to look uniform on both sides. So I have to do that. I have to work the increase on the 4th stitch so that I will have the increase stitch with its a purl looking bar 3 stitches before the edge. Actually, with this wool, as I've said, it doesn't matter because you're not going to see it. But I'm going to show you how to do it so in future projects you'll know how to do it. So we knit through the front loop and then we put the tip of the needle through the back loop like that and knit it. And there we've got the bar and then we've got 3 stitches. Keep working all the increases as set, and then once you've done the final increase and you've got the correct amount of stitches that you need for your size, keep working in stocking stitch until the sleeve measures the required length for your size. Now, if you know that you have shorter or longer arms than average, this is where you can custom size your knitting. So take a garment that you know fits you really well, and bear in mind we're going to knit a jacket where you're going to have clothes underneath, so the armhole is going to be a little deeper than, say, on a tight-fitting jumper. I've just got a rather tight-fitting jumper here. But so take a garment that fits you really well, and then you're going to measure your sleeve from the cuff until the underarm. So you put both cuff edges together and then just patting it along, not stretching it, and seeing where it is compared to the underarm. So you need to knit up to the length of your underarm of a garment that fits you very well. Then you know it's going to be perfect for you. So do that. Once you've knitted the required length, we'll be ready to work the sleeve cap. And this is the sleeve cap already done. So you can see there's a cast off edge and then a slow decrease up to the top. You've continued knitting your sleeve until it reaches the correct measurement, and you've done that, measured that from your sleeve cuff to your sleeve underarm, and then you'll know it perfectly fits you. Your last row has to have been a wrong side row, so you've got the right side facing you. And now you're ready to shape the cap of the sleeve. So we're going to cast off at the beginning of the next 2 rows and then slowly decrease so our sleeve cap has this form. Remember, as you go along your decreases, keep counting how many stitches you should have and check with the pattern. And that way you'll catch any mistakes you've made early and you'll have less unpicking to do. So we're going to start decreasing or casting off the required amount of stitches for your size. So just a normal decrease which you've done on the back panel and the side panels. So I first of all knit 2 stitches, bring the first one over the second and checking that I'm not pulling too tight. Okay, so that's a cast off on this side, and I'm going to knit to the end of the row, and I'll speed this up for you. Okay, So now we're at the end of the row and we're ready to cast off on the next row, and that's going to be casting off on the purl side. So as usual on the purl side, I always knit the first stitch to keep the edge nice and firm. So that's a knit one, yarn to the front of the fabric, purl one, then I put it around to the back. Again, it's easier for me to cast off, so that's one stitch. I purl the next, two. So this is casting off in pattern, means that you knit or purl how you normally would and then cast off. Okay, so there I've cast off on the beginning of the first two rows of the shaping of the top. I'll purl to the end of this row and then I'll show you how we're going to decrease on a stitch on each end. That's casting off at the beginning of the first two rows. So every size has got a different amount of stitches to cast off. Okay, so now you have to decrease one stitch at each end of the next row, and then on some further rows, and the pattern will tell you when to do that. I'm just going to show you. So you're simply going to knit two together, the first two stitches, knit them together. So the needle goes up, knit those two together, then continue to the end of your row until you have two stitches left, and then knit those two together. And that's how you decrease one stitch at either end. And all of these decreases will happen on the right side of the fabric, so during a knit row. I'm at the end of that row, I've got the last two stitches, and again I'm going to knit those two together. Okay, so that's how you decrease one stitch at either end of the row. Then you'll purl back and you keep doing as much stocking stitch as the pattern tells you, and then when it tells you to do the decrease rows at decreasing one stitch at either end, that's what you'll continue to do. So continue doing those decreases until you have your final row, and you'll have around 13 stitches, and then we're going to cast that off together. So your sleeve cap should now look like this, and we're ready to cast off the remaining stitches. And we're just going to cast off like we've cast off all the other stitches in the project. So knit one, knit two, give the first one a tug so it's loose, slip it over. So I'm really making sure that my stitches are loose on the needle. After I've done half of them, I stop and pull out to make sure that this edge here is going to be as relaxed as the knitting underneath. And then I keep going. So there we go. That's a nice loose edge. Okay, so that's nice and stretchy. And I'm going to cut off my yarn. I always leave a long tail so that I've got enough to sew up with. Pull that through the loop, and there we're finished. Okay, so knit your second sleeve, and I will show you how to put the whole thing together. But first of all, what you'll need to do is, before we sew things up, is you should block the individual pieces. And you can do that two ways. You could simply press with an iron like this, press the fabric over the top of a damp cloth. I just use a wet tea towel. I put the wet tea towel over and I press with a warm iron just like this. That's one option. The other option is that you could put it in some lukewarm water. So the temperature that you would bath a newborn baby in. So you don't want to shock the wool with too cold or too hot. Certainly not too hot. And so let it soak for 10 minutes and then just squeeze it, the most of the water out like this. Certainly don't wring. You don't want to be doing that. So squeeze most of the water out like that. And then you can wrap it in a towel. So you put a towel underneath, put your fabric on top, you can put a towel over the top, and then roll them all up together like this. And what I do is I stand on it, and the weight of my body squeezes the excess water into the towel. So I just gently stand like I'm doing with my hands. Okay, and then you take it out and you can pin it somewhere. If you've got blocking foam, that's ideal, or you can simply put a towel on the ground and spread your knitting out nice and flat. You can check in the pattern, it'll tell you how long it's meant to be, how wide it's meant to be, and then you just stick your needles or your pins down the side like that to make sure it's suitable for your size, which it should be. And then it takes sometimes a day to dry, and then the knitting should also look a lot more even after you've done that. Then they'll be ready to sew them together. So well done, keep going, finish the second sleeve and do the blocking, and then I'll see you for assembling the project. You've now completed the left side and the right side all the way up past the shoulders. There's the shoulders. This is the back of the hood, and right up to the top of the hood. So here you can see you've got the cast off edge, and then we have our 22 live stitches left at the front of the hood. Now I'm going to show you how to join these two stitches together, these two lots of stitches together. The first thing you need to do is put the right sides of the fabric together. The right side is the knit side. So we're going to just simply turn it over like this. So you've got the knit and the knit sides together, and on the outside you've got the purl side, and the outside here is the purl. That's really, really important. And you can see that they match up nicely. So we've got the 22 live stitches here and 22 live stitches here on your stitch holder. I just use an extra needle. Doesn't matter. This is a much smaller size needle. It doesn't matter. What we're going to do now is knit parallel. So we're going to knit both stitches, both the first stitches together, and then the second and the third, etc., all the way down. So what needle I'm using here doesn't matter. What matters is that the needle that I knit onto is the correct size. So I'm going to show you how to graft together these two edges. I'm going to put in my needle like a knit. Even though I've got the purl facing me, I'm still going to knit. So I'm putting my needle in through the first stitch and in through the first stitch of the second needle, the behind needle. And then I'm going to knit them both together, pulling it through, both of them, and then slipping both those stitches off. So I've knitted those two stitches together into one stitch here. I'm going to do the same, and I'm going to be casting off at the same time. So I'm going to keep it relatively loose. So in through the first needle, in knitwise through the second behind needle, knit both of those together, making sure my stitches are loose. You can see how loose they are. And then with one of the needles, I take the back stitch, give it a bit of a tug, and put it over the top of the second stitch. Now I'm going to continue on. So I knit in through the first stitch on the first needle, in through the first stitch on the second needle, knit them together. Use the end to lift the first over the second stitch here. And then I'm going to do this slowly and make sure that the cast off edge is going to be just as flexible as the material underneath. So making sure it's nice and loose. So that's why it's really important that you've got the same number of stitches on both needles. I'm keeping it loose. It's a little bit fiddly with two needles there. I'm stopping now and just checking, yep, that's going to be good. Don't wait till you're finished before you check how your seam is, or you'll have to undo it. Well, if it's wrong, you'll have to undo it. So it's actually quicker to go slower and to check regularly. So I always give that stitch a bit of a tug before I lift it over to make sure it's loose. Okay, so I want you to continue doing that to the end. I'm just going to give you a little sneak preview of how nice that looks. When I turn that over, there's your seam. If I can get my needles out the way. There's your seam. So that looks lovely, and you can see the rows of columns of knit stitches going into the other one. Okay, so continue to graft to the end here, and then don't cut off your yarn. We're going to use that yarn to continue sewing around the edge of the hood. So we've now grafted both sides. I've taken out my needle, I've cut my yarn, but I've left it really quite long, and I'm going to stick it through this hole, through the loop, and pull it tight. Okay, and then with this end, I'm going to sew all the way around the hood. But the first thing you need to do for that is get your pins. And you'll see here that they match. So you've got little steps. You want to try to match them together. So you put the first two together and pin it like that. Find the next one, pin them, and these corner ones here. Okay, so and then I go right to the end. This is the back of the hood, and I get the very two corner stitches and put them exactly together. You're going to be sewing into the absolute corners. So we have to line everything up to start off with, and then we know when we're sewing it, it's going to end well. Okay, so we're going to put these two together. So we work a little bit here, a little bit there, down to the middle, so that we can tell that one side, we don't want one side stretched and the other gaping. So I just do that. Put in a pin, and I come down here on the top. Put in a pin. Okay, and the final one in the middle. Okay, so that's all pinned nicely. Here I am. I need a nice big tapestry needle or a weaving needle big enough so it's very easy to get your wool in. Now I get the end like this, I wrap it round so it's a nice sharp edge, and then I put it through like that. That's a very easy way of threading your needle. I'll show you again. I'm just assuming that you've never done any sewing, so I'm just trying to show you everything you need to know. So I just wrap it around and push it through. Okay, so we're going to do a back stitch. I use back stitch on everything. So you can see I've got a couple extra, that's the end from my other side. So I will weave that in later. So I'll just put it out of the way. Now back stitch you can use for almost any seam. I really like it, and I use it for, I would have to say, 95% of my seaming. So if you have a look at the cast off edge, and it's hard to see with this fuzzy wool, but you'll have stitches shaped like this in the rows. You want to put your needle under both of them like that, so not just in front, under one, otherwise you'll have this little stitch on the right side and it won't look that neat. So you want to put them under both, on both sides. So here we go, here we're going to put it under 2 and under 2. Okay, so there's the thread. Whoops, I'll put it in again. Under 2 and under 2. Now that's not too far down, it's just the top stitch. Okay, then what I do, because sometimes your wool can easily get tangled up, I just put my finger there and pull this through until it's like a semicircle. Then I put my needle back under both of those two stitches, cast off stitches like that, about halfway through. And then I pull it, and that's my first stitch. And then I do it again to the next one. So under 1, under 2, and then under 2 here. Pull it through and pull it back, and I'm pretty well halfway through, and pull it again. Okay? And you do it to every stitch. So this is how to do back stitch, and you're going to do all of your seams in back stitch. So continue slowly along the edge, right the way down to here, and then I'm show you how I end off, and then we've sewn up the hood. So we've back stitched our seam all the way down, and I've just come to the end, and I'm going to make sure that I put my needle into the very edge stitch of both sides, like this. Actually, I've got a bit of space, so I'm going to do a stitch in between that. And then the very edge stitch of both of them, that means that the edges are going to come really beautifully together. Okay, and I might do that again. I separated a little bit, just pick this up and that up. Now, because I'm going to finish, I always make my sewing so that they're never ever going to come apart. So this time I'm going to now put my needle up through this hole, and that's like doing a knot. Okay, and now with the edge I'm going to darn it in, and I find it easier if I turn around on this side, and you can see my stitches. You may not see it here, but if you look at your work, your stitches will be going across like that. So now I'm just going to weave my end of my needle in, woven it in about that much. Pull it through, straighten it out. You can do a few more if you want to be absolutely certain it's never going to come undone in any amount of washing. Whoops, I give it a stretch, and then I'm going to cut off my end. Now that's how you're going to start and finish all of your seams. So, this little piece here, that was the end of my knitting from one side. I'm also going to just darn in. So you'll find you'll have little ends like this in your work, and you just have to darn them in along the seams. So I'm going to darn it back in here through the stitches that I made to sew the seams up. Okay, so that's how you do back stitch. And if we open up the hood, the inside of the hood, you can see we've got this lovely seam going all the way, and that's where we grafted it together. So here we've got the hood. We've just grafted it together here and continued sewing on. And here we've got the back section. So that's our armholes. And we're going to join the shoulder seam. So I've already joined the shoulder seam on the right, and I'm going to walk you through joining the left shoulder seam. So every time you're joining seams or sewing up seams, you must have the right sides together, because you want to have your seam to be on the inside of the fabric, not on the outside. So we're going to put this over like this. So this is the shoulder seam on the, that's going to be the left front, and this is the back. You can see the armhole here. So we're going to put these two together like that. And you can see this matches as well. There's the armhole of the left front. We match them up together like that. We're going to sew across here. And that's going to fit very well together because we've got the cast off edge of 5 stitches and then 6 stitches on both pieces. So I'm going to show you how to do that. And then you're going to do it for the other side. Then I'm going to walk you through joining the back of the hood to the back of the neck. And you might have to, depending on how it fits, you might have to ease in the hood. After you've done that, you're then going to join the side seams. So I've already done this side seam. If I flip it over like this, so you're going to put always right sides together, and there's the armhole, and you're going to sew from underneath the arm right down to the hem, all in back stitch. That'll leave you, once you've done your shoulder seam, with a hole like this, and that's where we're going to put in the sleeve. So I'll show you how to do the sleeve. Before that though, you need to take your sleeve, the other way around like this. This section here is what we call the sleeve cap, and this is the underarm. So again, you fold your knitting in half with the right sides facing like this. And this is the underarm, and you're going to sew from your underarm right down to your cuff. So you're going to pin just like I showed you how to pin the hood. You're going to go through, you put the edge stitches together and you put in a pin. And then you put the edge stitches of the cuff together make sure they're absolutely together. You put in a pin, and then you slowly work your way up, putting in a pin. The pinning is the most important. If you get your pieces to sit nicely together, then the sewing is really not so difficult. So I'm just measuring them up as I go down, and I'll go back to this edge, put another pin in. I've left a very long cast on end tail, and I'm going to use this yarn to sew along the top. If you haven't done that, that doesn't matter. Just start putting a knot, sew, and then your tail end you have to weave in afterwards. But it's a good thing to remember when you're casting on to leave a big end. Okay, so that's what you'll be doing, sewing along, either starting at the cuff, going upwards, or under the arm, going down to the cuff. It doesn't matter. And then we will be fitting this hole here into this hole here. So do your arm sleeve, sew up that. I'm going to show you now how to do the shoulder seam, and then you're going to do the other shoulder seam and both side seams between the back and the fronts, and we'll be ready to put in the sleeve in its hole and the back of the neck. So that's the back section here with the left shoulder, and you can see it's got 5 and 6 cast off with a little step there. And this is the left shoulder inside out, so the right sides are going to be stuck together, and they match with 6 and 5. And now I'm going to pin them together. So I put my very corner stitches together like this. Then I'm going to put these little 2 bumps together. And then I'm going to put this edge right in the corner here. So right there. So there's that, and that's going to go right there. And I'm going to do it again to secure it. Okay, and now underneath both there and both here. And I'll put my finger in, and then I'm going to go back again under both in the middle. Okay, so here I am, that's the last stitch. I'm going to make sure that they are going to be exactly together. I can straighten it out like that to make sure I'm going to have a straight seam here. I'll do it one more time, and this time I put my needle up through here so I know that I'm going to have a knot. It's very secure. I turn it around and my stitches are slanting this way, and that makes it easy for me just to thread them through. So I'm just weaving the end of my needle through. Okay, so that's really going to be fine. I have to find my scissors now. Cut off the edge, and that's the shoulder seam done. If I turn it around, that's what it looks like. So I want you to do the other side. So you've done 2 shoulder seams. You'll have this little loop in the back. I'll show you how to knit those 2 together. You need to do your from underarms down to the hem side seams of the back and the fronts, and your sleeve seam, and then I will show you how to insert the sleeve into the main body. So this is the back neck, and this is the back of the hood, and we're going to sew them up together. The first thing you want to do is count the stitches, or count the columns of stitches across on the back, and then put a pin right in the middle, on the middle stitch. Then you're going to line up that pin with this seam from the back of the hood. You're going to put them together like this and pin them. So now you've got the middles. And then you're going to take the edges and see how well they fit together. Now mine fit pretty well. If you have a little bit of puckering on the hood and it's more, then you have to, again, the best thing to do is you put the ends together. You measure where the middle is, you stick a pin here. You do the same with the other side, put the ends together, figure where the middle is, put a pin there, and then you're going to put those 2 pins together, and you do it the same here. Okay, that's how you make sure it's going to work out. And if the hood, for instance, is going to be a little bit bubbly, then the bubbles are going to be very evenly spread along. I don't need to do that, but that's the method to do. Also, if you've got a little step like that, just remember that they need to be sewn close together. So I just find my edging and I put a pin in. I put a pin in here. And I make sure that this and this. The other thing I can do, I can just lift this middle stitch up a little bit to ease it in, or stretch it further here. You really need to see how you are. It's always a little bit different. There. But the pinning, take time over your pinning. Sewing is easy. And this side. And a pin in here. So I'm just showing you how I'm pinning, because I've showed you already in quite some detail how to backstitch. Okay, so I can see that that's nicely pinned. So now I don't have any attached thread that I can sew with, so I have to just take a new thread, and I thread my needle. I'm going to start here in this corner. So I take out my pin, and I'm going to leave a tail end here, and then I just start. So I go in there. Now see how you've got this loose stitch? You don't want to sew just in like that or you'll get a hole. So here I would go down one below or even pierce halfway through it, halfway through the yarn. But you'll want to avoid getting holes if possible. Sometimes it's a bit tricky. Okay, so I pull all the way through with about that much left over. And I'll go back up here and in again. Okay, now I've got a loop. So I'm going to go one more time. And then up through this loop. And that's very secure. That's not going anywhere. Okay, later on I'll darn that in. And then I start. Continue sewing along there and then darn or weave back in the end, and you can get rid of the end here. And this is also an end from my knitting, so I can weave along that seam as well. So that's the shoulder seam sewn up and the side seam sewn up. We've got a complete circle and we've got our knitting side, the right side on the outside. Now we take our sleeve and we've sewn up our seam. And again, this is the knitting side is on the outside. Now we have to make sure that we place the sleeve with the knitting side together. So we are going to put the bottom seam together with this seam. So the seam that goes from the underarm down to the hem on the side seam is going to match the underarm to cuff seam of the sleeve. And we're going to put both of the knit sides together. We get a pin and feel exactly where I'm speaking with a pin in my mouth. Okay, so I've put the seam exactly together, back to back. And I put my needle in and through. So now I know that's really secure. I can also match that up there and put a needle on either side, a pin on either side. These are just ends I have to weave in. Okay, so we know that that is secure. So there's the sleeve. It's going to be joined here, like that. But we need to sew it from the inside. So we're going to turn it around like this. Okay, and so here we've got, you have to excuse all of the ends. So this is the top part of my sleeve cap, and that's my shoulder seam. And you can see that I'm putting the right sides together. And I have to fit in the sleeve exactly with the armhole shaping of the body. So I've made that exactly secure, and that's right. The next thing I do is measure this seam here has to come exactly halfway here. Okay, so you can count the rows on your last cast off edge, and then you can put your needle directly in the middle, or you can get this stitch and this stitch, put them exactly together like that. and that's how you find the middle. Okay, so here is going to line up exactly with the shoulder seam. So that's how I pin it. Just like that. Take the pin out and line it up exactly there. So now I've got those two bits exactly right, and I have to ease these two together and these two together. Okay, so I start around here first. Let's do a little bit more here. As I keep saying, it's all in the pinning. If you've pinned it correctly, it's pretty hard to go wrong with your sewing. Look at all those colourful pins. Okay, so you can see that's a perfect fit. I've got two ends to work from. This is my cast off end from the top of the sleeve cap, and this is a bit of tail left from going up the seam of the sleeve. So I think I might work with this one. What will I do? Around here, and this one around there. So I'll start with this one first. Okay, so I'm starting here, take out that pin. You can see now that it's just going to be easy for me to backstitch around this. It was all about pinning it properly. So I'm not going to show you the whole sewing up. You've seen enough sewing up to have confidence on how to do it. So I don't take my pin out completely, I just move it along to the side so I've got enough for one finger. And then, again, making sure I go underneath the edge. I've already sewn up this section here. Let's just take a quick look at how it looks. And there we go. So that's the top of the shoulder seam there, and that's what I've already sewn up. And here's my pins for where I have to continue to sew on both sides. So occasionally turn it over and see how it goes to check that everything's looking good. Continue sewing. You've got your both armholes to do, and then you've finished your garment. Now you have already blocked it beforehand. You can press the seams again with a damp cloth when it's all sewn up together, and then you're ready to wear it. I've really enjoyed showing you this. I really hope you enjoy making it. Thank you for watching this tutorial. I hope you had a great time making your hooded coat, and I would love to see some pictures. So if you'd like to post some pictures, you can do so on Ravelry in my Fruity Knitting podcast group, or Instagram, you can tag me with Fruity Knitting, and on Facebook as well, I'm Fruity Knitting. So if you've enjoyed this tutorial and you'd like to see some more, please subscribe. I have got regular knitting podcasts, tutorials and technique videos.